I'm Katie.
I'm Vinny, and this is Learn Real Good.
It's the holiday season, Vinny.
I mean, it is currently while we are recording, but
Yes.
not necessarily when it comes
No.
out. Although it may fall on a holiday when this is released.
Correct. That's why I said holiday and not the
Chris-
particular.
like
don't
the-
say
don't say
that now. That's,
No.
denominational.
All right.
Winter holiday.
A winter solstice holiday.
Do you like the holidays, Vinny? What
I
you
do
about
like the holidays. I like seeing people. Like, people go out of their way to make time to hang out, and you don't have as many work obligations.
Totally.
So, for most people, not everybody gets that privilege of having the holidays off.
Of course.
But for a lot of people, you have more time to spend with family and friends, and I like that.
Yeah, because I've always been in school and I refuse to leave. They try to get rid of me. They can't.
Right.
December's always a phone it in month. You know, when you're a student, it kind of
Right.
was. You know, you watch movies. There's so many like fake school days in there. It's so awesome. And then for work, I basically am off for most of December.
And yeah, as a teacher, you do exams and then you're done.
Yeah, it's amazing.
That's great.
So like December is coded in my brain as just like fun times.
Mm-hmm.
Make cookies, eat cookies.
It's cookie month.
It's cookie month in our house.
All
for
cookie
sure.
diet for the month of December.
Yeah, I love it. Love it. What's your
pretty great.
favorite holiday cookie, Vinny?
Uh,
Pick one.
man, anything with nuts and or chocolate. That's a great combo.
Oh yeah, there's a lot to choose from. I would agree. Nuts first.
Nuts over chocolate.
For the
That's
holidays,
a surprising take for you.
cookies.
Right.
I'm very picky about my chocolate. I don't like chocolate cake. I'm not a big cake
No,
person.
you're not.
I like solid chocolate.
That's a good pick.
Like a chocolate bar. I like that.
You're a big fan of and you don't mean like chocolate with like nougat in it. You mean like just a chocolate bar, just solid chocolate.
Of the chocolate
Milk
bars.
chocolate or dark chocolate?
You know it's milk.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, that's where we disagree. It's the only place
I'm a
we
dark
disagree.
chocolate
You're
guy.
a dark chocolate guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I also like nuts.
You're nuts about them.
Correct.
Nuts are great. All right, well, we sound a little nuts, so let's get to the show, shall we? I
Yes.
love a segue. So this is Learn Real Good, which is a fun, we hope, science, we hope, podcast where me and Vinny shoot the shit a little bit. And then we talk about science facts, which is coming up next, and we have an awesome guest.
I love the show.
We were currently, because there's all sorts of aggregate sites now that tell you like how many listeners you have and rate you, like where you are in popularity currently.
Mm-hmm.
Each day it updates based on the number of downloads you've had. And last I looked, a couple days ago,
At the end of season 1.
yeah, we finished season 1 at this point in real time. And we haven't had a new episode for a couple weeks, but we were number 50 top most listened to podcast in Canada, categorized as improv comedy, which this isn't.
It's not improv.
We're improvising
comedy.
this conversation.
I mean, it's comedic.
Yeah,
I would say the number 1 category is science and the number 2 category is
agree.
comedy.
but that's just how it got categorized.
But we're still top 50.
That's something, man.
That's a prize.
So thanks for listening.
Thanks, top 50ers. I call you T50s.
Okay. All right. So now we get to the facts. Vinny, do you want to go first? You go first.
I got a good fact for you.
Oh, go for it.
So I love Mars. It's a great planet.
Yeah.
People like looking at it, dreaming about visiting it.
There's
And
a
there's-
chocolate bar named Mars, as of course I'm
So
aware of.
that's your favorite Mars, and mine is the planet.
All right.
But we have that rover wandering around, that big one that just landed,
Right.
and it dropped a helicopter
Whoa.
on Mars. Now, do you know about this helicopter?
I know nothing about anything.
Okay, so Mars has an atmosphere, but it's very thin, very,
Okay.
very thin. It is 1.5%
Whoa.
the atmosphere that we have on Earth
At sea level.
at sea level.
Okay.
Very, very thin.
Right.
So helicopters, planes, they all operate
Yeah.
on lift, which requires an atmosphere. You know, helicopters can't fly above a certain
Yeah.
height because the atmosphere gets too thin. So they wanted to see if they could make they, being NASA, wanted to see if they can make a helicopter fly on Mars.
Okay.
And it's a very specifically designed helicopter. The rover just put it down on the ground, then drove away, and then they tried to see if it could fly, and it did.
Whoa.
And so they've been testing this for a while now because it's been on Mars for a bit. And it's a huge success. So far, it has flown 3 kilometers distance. It goes as high as 12 meters and can fly for as long as 170 seconds.
Does it look like a normal
It looks like a drone.
helicopter?
It looks like a drone with like a single
Okay.
rotor on the top, and it just mostly goes up and then side to side.
So is this going to change how we do? Because I know the context in which I'm familiar with this is the
Yes.
fact that I like a lot of mountain climbing things.
Right.
I used to be obsessed with Everest as a kid. And I know it's an issue for rescue that you can't fly that high because the altitude. And so it's, you have to get people who are on the ground to save you if they can. So is this going to affect, I assume, how we make helicopters on Earth for rescue?
I mean, I suppose. I feel like if they can design a helicopter to work on Mars, they could design one to work on Earth.
Oh, right.
But then becomes like a practical problem that something that could fly in that thin atmosphere might not be able to get off the ground in thick atmosphere.
Oh, wow.
So what's good about it though is that now NASA's excited that they prove that you could fly a helicopter on Mars, and so now they're going to design, I think, a drone to go on Mars.
Whoa.
So they get like drone shots, and it's easier to fly around potentially than a drive around.
Of
on
course.
A rover, and get some really good aerial visuals.
Don't get stuck on stuff.
Or you send a rover and a drone to like work in tandem. One's on the ground, one's flying around. You got like an eagle eye over it.
Oh. And they have a friend that way.
Yeah, there's a buddy for them to talk to and cuddle with at night.
Very cool.
Yeah, so that's what's happening on Mars.
Cool fact.
Yeah. I want to hear your fact,
Okay.
Katie.
All right. So this is a discovery fact.
All right, I appreciate that you're pointing at me.
I am.
Podcaster
viewers.
listeners, they're not viewers.
One day.
One day we'll have a TV show.
My facial expressions are lost on this audio recording. When I say creepy crawly, what do you think of, Vinny?
Worms and spiders.
Okay. Well, kind of. I mean, worm doesn't really crawl, does it?
It's creepy.
It's the creepy part.
It's the creepy crawly.
Okay. What about creepy crawlies with legs? What do you think?
Worms with legs, which we call centipedes.
Okay. Well, those aren't worms.
They're worms with legs.
No, they're arthropods. But in any case.
They're annelids.
No, they're not.
It could be.
Okay. All right. So this is a millipede discovery.
A millipede found something?
How many legs do you think a millipede has?
Man, like 100?
Well, so they're named millipede for
Right.
having like 1,000 legs.
Sure.
But up to this new discovery, none actually had. They were all a lie.
Oh.
They didn't have 1,000,000 legs. They had hundreds. And the previous record holder was 750 legs. But that's like way above average. They're usually like a few hundred. So this new millipede
Yes.
that they've discovered
Hot new millipede just dropped.
has 1,300
Well, that's double.
legs.
Nearly double.
Yes. So with so many legs, how big do you think this is?
Oh, is it huge? Is it really gross? Like a
I'm
really
asking to
like-
keep it fun, man.
like half
What
a
do you
meter
think?
millipede?
Oh,
Yeah, that's gross, right?
that
Yeah,
would be horrifying.
Well, this is what I'm picturing, and it is horrifying.
Is that too big to be creepy crawly? Because
No.
I feel like there's a size element to creepy
It is
crawly.
still creepy crawly. Extra creepy
It's
crawly.
like freaky deaky. in
Yeah,
my
freaky
books.
deaky. Yeah. Well, level 1, creepy crawly. Level 2, freaky deaky.
Freaky deaky creepy crawly?
Yeah, freaky
Or is
deaky,
it-
creepy
okay,
crawly.
Yeah. No, it is much smaller than that. It is 10 centimeters long
It's still too big.
and 1 millimeter wide.
Oh,
It's all
man.
leg at that point.
Oh, man.
Real leggy
Yeah.
arthropod. So these were discovered. Let me get this right. These were discovered, I believe, in Australia, of course. So a mining company was like digging deep in the earth, basically checking, getting an idea of the native biodiversity to make sure that this new mining project wouldn't kill anything important. And they found in their traps like a dozen of these things that had never been seen before.
Yikes.
Gross, eh?
Creepy and crawly.
That's a lot of legs.
Man,
Yeah.
1,300 legs?
So you already thought they were creepy crawly
Is it
freaky deaky,
even?
right?
Is it? Can it have an odd number of legs?
If one gets ripped off, but they grow in pairs.
But they grow in pairs?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't think anything has an odd number of.
Starfish?
I mean, you're right. You're right at that point. But it's very rare for things to have an odd
Yeah,
number
for
of
sure.
things. I mean, like odd numbered petaled flowers is also sort of a rarity.
Is there anything with like tripedal?
No.
No, it's rare.
No,
5?
because it's just because the genetic basis. It's easier
Sure,
to
yeah,
pair
easier for have
things.
one axis symmetry.
And you know we love a symmetry. Anyway, so you already think they're creepy crawly freaky deaky.
Yes. Wait, is there more?
They're pale colored. and thread-like. Well, I guess the
You're not helping.
I know. I'm just looking at the way they describe them to see more things that are creepy. Anyway, that's it.
That's too creepy for me.
It's too much. Actually, 1,306 legs.
Specifically.
I mean, I like someone took the patience. You had to restart that counting a few times, I feel like. 1,300 and what? Ah, crap.
I gotta start
All right,
over.
start over. It's more than 750.
That's
But if I'm going to
amazing.
call Guinness, I want a hard number.
Yeah, you want it. I mean, if I find one with 1,304, I'll feel pretty good. And then I'll call and be like, no, sorry. Second place.
Your greatest work thwarted.
Yeah. Silver medal again.
You hate a silver. Silver's the worst, right? Bronze, at least you got something.
At
I
least you
think that's
got
a
something. Yeah.
Seinfeld joke.
Gold, you win first.
Yeah.
Bronze, you got a consolation prize. Silver,
Well, we have a gold level guest today, Vinny.
yes, we do.
And it is my honor to introduce them. Our guest this week is Moira Ijzerman. She's currently working on her MSc in environmental toxicology at the University of Guelph. She's working on developing a new method for monitoring pesticides
Whoa.
in aquatic ecosystems. Aside from fly fishing, film photography, and rock climbing, there's nothing Moira loves more than her two fluffy cats. Please welcome Moira to the show. Welcome, Moira.
Hi, Moira.
Hi guys, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
The honor is all ours.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
I gotta ask, where are these fluffy cats?
They're actually right below me right now, chewing on my feet.
Are they slippers?
Yes. They're my personal toe warmers.
Aw,
Oh, that sounds lovely. I
Yeah.
would love a cat toe warmer.
it's true.
Yeah.
They're great.
They're my life. What can I say?
Vinny's allergic to cats, so he has to sit on my feet.
And Katie's allergic to dogs.
Yeah. So you just have sad fish.
So am I, but my two cats are hypoallergenic, so there is hope for you.
Oh.
Magic.
What breed is hypoallergenic?
I think it's a Balinese Himalayan mix.
Okay.
Couldn't tell you. All I know is that it's stamped hypoallergenic, and I do not have the sniffles. So
Perfect. Well,
On the cat, there's a big stamp on it.
well, Moira, thanks for being here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your research? What is a pesticide?
pesticides, where to begin? I guess, as you know, Southern Ontario is like a very intensive agricultural region. And especially in Canada, unfortunately, heavy agriculture comes with a dependence on pesticide usage. And of course, pesticides are aimed for pests, and this can be weeds or insects or really anything that is harmful for the crops being grown. So there's these specific chemicals that you can apply to target whatever particular pest is bothering your crops. However, a big problem can arise because, as you may predict, pesticides can have a pretty big impact on non-target organisms as well. They're just generally pretty toxic. So unfortunately, these can end up being dispersed into the environment. So I'm looking at finding a new way to monitor in aquatic environments.
Are there particular pesticides, Moira, that seem to be more damaging to aquatic life, or a certain chemical in certain pesticides, or they're just all equally bad?
I think it kind of changes with depending on what research is coming out. I know we keep going back and forth with banning certain pesticides because they tend to be particularly toxic. Like neonicotinoids are usually a pretty hot topic in agricultural research, and probably you've heard like save the bees.
Right.
But the issue if you ban a particular pesticide, the farmers are stuck with something that doesn't target that particular pest anymore, and you end up just phasing in a new pesticide, and that usually ends up being toxic as well. So it's difficult. There's like no real clear answer on how to stop using pesticides. I think just the way our agricultural industry is set up, we will probably always be dependent on them, but there's a way to mitigate this and work around it. But the particularly harmful pesticides, like big ticket names like DDT, have been banned for quite a while just because they have like such a long half-life, and we'll find them still in our environment like years and years later. So most of them we phase out. But with emerging research, you never know what's going to happen in a few years down the road. So it's a bit tricky.
So if I'm a fish and I'm not for
So
clarity so far. But if I'm a fish and I'm sucking in neonicotinoids, what was
Nailed it. We can call them neonics for sure.
it?
Neonics.
Thank you. Edit. If I'm a fish sucking in neonics, what happens to me? Like, how is it toxic?
Well, it kind of depends on the pesticide. And for fish, like it's not really a commonly used test organism, but I guess I can speak more to like aquatic tox, not just pesticides, because
Sure.
we have all kinds of pollutants entering the river.
Right.
You name it, it's there. But I know some of the work that my lab is doing, they're looking at fish upstream of wastewater treatment plants and below stream of wastewater treatment plants. And unfortunately, we're finding things like male and female parts being switched around in fish or gonads being smaller. Usually, I guess in organisms in general, like if they're exposed to a toxin, more of that energy will be pushed towards like detoxifying their body. So
Right.
you have smaller, less fecundacy, so less eggs that are actually hatching. It's just not good.
Yeah.
They're slower, probably more susceptible to predators. Just not a good situation.
Sounds bad.
So the farmers are spraying their pesticides on their crops, and then I'm like, this is my knowledge of it. The rain comes, it goes into the water table, and then it goes out into our rivers and streams and goes out into the ocean. And so you are looking at how to measure that better?
Yes, exactly. So I feel like we don't often think about what happens when pesticides are applied, but actually only a really small portion actually reaches the intended target.
Really?
And the rest is just dispersed into the environment. And that can be through spray drift, where it's just being blown around on a windy day, or it can be leached, as you're saying, into the water column, or it just, as you're saying as well, like during a heavy rain event or irrigation, it can just be swept off as runoff into surrounding water bodies. And then I guess my research kind of comes in because obviously we want to know what kind of toxins are in our rivers. And it's actually pretty tricky to figure out how to measure these pollutants. So typically what you will do if you want to measure a particular river's pesticides is you would just take water samples. And unfortunately, this isn't really done on a schedule. It's not done around heavy rain events or irrigation. It's kind of just whenever someone can get out there and actually take a water sample. And I mean, if you're only going out probably 1 to 5 times in a growing season, you're kind of relying on those specific time points to portray like the whole picture of what's going on in the river. But then obviously, as we were just talking about, the amount of toxins in a river isn't just a plateau. There's kind of peaks and it goes lower. And we have these pesticide pulses, which happens like right after a rainfall. But if you're not taking a water sample, like right during that pulse, like it's possible most of our toxicity data is just showing these lower background chronic concentrations. So that is the problem I want to tackle for my thesis, because you can't just take more water samples because they're super expensive. Each sample costs a ridiculous amount of money to analyze, and to like get those perfect pesticide pulses, you need to like be measuring pesticides every few hours. And that's ridiculous.
Who's got the funding for that?
Not
no
me.
one.
Yeah, people don't realize how expensive this is, right? To pay like how many people full time to like cover all the water bodies in Ontario, right?
Yeah, especially with a province as big as Ontario. And I mean, agriculture is everywhere in the province and of course across Canada. So we have to like pick specific sites to monitor, and then you got to get out there, and that's a lot of labor. You need a huge team doing this. So they actually will rely on conservation authorities to do all the sampling and then send it off for them. But I mean, it's unfortunately you can't be out there every 30 minutes taking samples. That would not
So Moira, like I have a hard time picturing what it looks like to collect and get a measurement. Like, what does that like? Is it someone with a little like mason jar and they scoop out some water and then they hold it up to the light and be like
analogy.
5? Yeah, what?
You are pretty close. It's so not a very scientific or very intense method, but if it's the conservation authorities, the way they do it at my sites is they'll literally just lower a bucket off a bridge, haul that bucket back up, and just scoop water out of it. Or you can actually just go into the river if you've got waders on, and you literally just take a few Nalgene's, fill them up, and then we're lucky we don't actually have to analyze it ourselves. We send it to a big fancy lab, and they do it for us. But they can screen using special methods that are very long and hard to pronounce, like liquid gas chromatography. And then that can, yes, but they can detect about 500 pesticides at the lab we send it to. So the issue mostly is gathering the samples. But that's how traditional water sampling works.
That's amazing.
Now you're working on something new, and given that we've had a previous conversation, Moira, I have a suspicion it has something to do with biofilms.
You are right.
So before we get to that, do you want to introduce us to the wonderful world of biofilms? What is a biofilm, first of all?
Well, that's a great question. It's a wonderful world. So I don't know if you've ever walked through a river barefoot and just absolutely slipped and face planted off those slippery rocks. The stuff that's growing on the rocks, that's a biofilm. So you've seen them, you know what they are. But yeah, they're that slimy substance that grows on any hard surfaces in rivers. And I mean, that's why they're so neat, because they're already in the environment. And basically it's just like this conglomerate of little diatoms and little guys, and they secrete this substance called an extracellular polymeric substance. But that just really means they can like interact with each other, and it forms like this glue, which allows them to stick to all these surfaces. And that's a biofilm. And they're so cool because they're already in the environment and just provide this really cool opportunity for seeing what's in our river, but from a living organism rather than just taking like water, or sometimes we take sediment samples instead. But yeah, I'm looking at using biofilms as a new way to monitor pesticides.
Now, before we get to that, if I'm a diatom and I'm making this snotty stuff to stick to a rock, why do you think they want to? Like, I know these are like photosynthesizing things. Why do they want to stick to something as opposed to just floating around? What's the benefit to being gluey?
I think it just allows them to act like a bigger organism. I kind of think about it like honeybees. And each bee has like a very small purpose, but together they act like the whole hive acts as like this whole functioning thing. And I guess if you're a little diatom hanging out in the water, you're not really doing much. But if you got a bunch of friends and you're all sticking together, you can get a lot more done. And they kind of can like share nutrients between each other. And yeah, they kind of just act as like a community rather than just a singular forming thing hanging out in the water.
Safety in numbers. Colonial.
It's like the holidays, hanging out with friends.
Nice tie-in, Vinny.
Thank you.
Okay, so how can these adorable little snotty diatoms help us with detecting pesticides then?
So the really cool thing about biofilms, this snotty substance that I think is so cool.
Can we call them snotties?
The difference between just taking a water sample is that it only gives you that snapshot into that particular time where you took your sample. But the cool thing about biofilms is that they're in the river and they are sticking in one place. And so that means they're continuously being exposed to pollutants entering the river. And some really cool research has come out of the University of Waterloo, and they are starting to find that these biofilms, and in this big community of snotty substance, they can accumulate pesticides at even higher levels than what's seen in the water. And a part of that reason is because they're made of like this really interesting mix of different types of diatoms and stuff. They have like a different chemical makeup. So they can attract different chemicals compared to what you would see in water. So if something doesn't dissolve in water, you wouldn't see it in a grab sample, like a grab water sample. But then chances are, if it doesn't dissolve in water, it's probably non-polar and wants to stick to organic matter and other non-polar things. So then that's why we keep finding it in the biofilm. And it's really important to know what's in the biofilm, because all these insects and fish and this, that, and the other, they eat the biofilm because it's a main food source for so many organisms. So we need to know if they're eating toxins as well. And that's kind of like a large exposure pathway that you don't really typically tackle in toxicology tests. Kind of just look at water exposure and expose a particular organism to like contaminated water. So it's kind of, I'm killing two birds with one stone.
Yeah, it sounds like these biofilms act like as a net. They just catch everything that kind of goes by in its snot.
Yes.
So how do you measure the toxins? Is it basically the same system, except now we can sort of follow it through time from the same sort of site? Like, do you still like grab some snot and send it to those same dorks in the lab with their big liquid gas chromatography?
Kind of. So the way I've designed my field system is that I have like a range of sites, and I could go through historical data. And so I picked my field sites to have like a gradient of pesticide exposure. So I had a handful of low exposure sites and some really high pesticide sites down in like the Leamington area, where we have like crazy amount of greenhouses. And of course, like it's like a hot spot for agriculture. So problem A was setting up this pesticide exposure gradient. And then I needed to come up with a way of measuring biofilms in rivers, because this wasn't something that's really done before. So I wanted to find two ways to measure the biofilm. So one way would just be measuring what's already there in the river. And that literally just entails going through the river in my waders, picking up rocks and just scrubbing all the biofilm off. And then that would be my sample. Very glamorous. But then the problem with that is, if I'm recommending this as a monitoring strategy to industry or government, what if they want to sample a river that doesn't have rocky substrate, or there's no biofilm, like it's found in very low quantities, so you can't really scrape rocks. Because some of my rivers, they only have like little pebbles, and I would be there all day with a toothbrush. Like it just, it's not, it's not really gonna work. So then I also wanted to find a way that gives them more of a uniform substrate to grow on. So I've designed this, I guess you could call it like an artificial substrate sampler, but I call them periphytometers because periphyton is also just interchangeable with biofilm. But it's like this giant cage contraption, and it has acrylic slides inside of it, and I'll drill it into the stream bed or attach it somehow depending on each river. And because it has these acrylic slides, the biofilm will grow on that. And because I know when I'm putting them in the river and when I'm taking them out after they're done being colonized, I can say, this is exactly an 8-week snapshot of what's going on in the river, rather than like just scrubbing them off rocks that could have been there. I have no idea how long. So it kind of just gives us like two different measurements. And I want to be able to say at the end of my thesis, like which method is better, because if you can see the same kind of stuff in naturally on the natural substrate, I'm not going to recommend to these poor field scientists to build these horrible contraptions that are so hard to get in the river when you could just see it instead. And, you know, cost is important as well. So I'm measuring both.
Wow. Now, scrubbing rocks, I have done that. I looked at trophic cascades in the St. Lawrence River, and for part of that, it was collecting rocks and scraping off green stuff with like steel toothbrushes. And that's
a biofilm. That's great.
I didn't even know, Moira. Where were you? I wasn't calling them that. I just called them periphyton, which is so much less cool, but biofilm, you know, that was
called snot rocks.
Snot rocks. But my hands, I don't know if you can relate to this, Moira, were destroyed. For that field season, I would come home and coat my hands in like Vaseline and go to bed. It was not great. I don't imagine that a lot of people for citizen science would be willing to pick up that hobby.
It's just such a particular smell. Like it's so horrible. And like, it's so funny that you say that, because like because all my field sites are so far apart and I have to go constantly to check on all my equipment. I just ended up like converting my car to like a little house because I was like, because it would take me 5 days and 4 nights that I'd be sleeping like on the road,
Whoa.
like
Wow.
going to all my sites, but I would have just be coated foot to neck in biofilm, sleeping in my own filth.
You didn't even need a sleeping bag.
Horrible smell. No, honestly, I didn't.
I would be riding the metro because we're in Montreal. We have a subway. I'd be riding the subway late at night after scraping my rocks till like midnight, just green and smelly.
Yeah.
But I just didn't care. It's a particular kind of person who does what we do, huh?
I just feel bad for everyone else that comes in my car, really.
I've never done a day of work in my life, so I have the hands of a royal princess.
You've helped me with similar field work.
Have, yeah.
You may not remember. We did a tile experiment too for scraping biofilm. Now, how did you fall in love with biofilms, Moira? Because that's not the most. It's not a panda.
What's the meet cute here?
Yeah.
It's not the most charismatic organism out there. I will give you that. I've accepted that, but. I guess it's not like the biofilm in particular that I'm interested. It's more like aquatics in general, which is kind of funny because I never thought I'd get here. But like I focused a lot in my undergrad on agriculture and like how it impacts the surrounding environment. So it was only like a natural transition. I love aquatics and I want to figure out how to protect them better. And biofilms are just like a pretty cool way to do that. And I love doing field work. I love being out there covered in muck. And because I'm also working with biofilms, I get to work a lot with aquatic invertebrates and other kind of creepy crawlies. And like I feed them this biofilm. So I just love like the whole idea of it. It's like, it feels more of like an applied science sometimes just because there was a few months I was like in the Home Depot every day. We're on first name basis because I just love like the applied aspect of it, I guess. But yeah, biofilms are cool too. They're not bad, but I like what they can do.
It's funny. People who are outside of science grad school have very little idea of what our lives are like. You bring up Home Depot. I have lots of fond memories of showing up at the Home Depot with all sorts of sketches, being like, okay, this is what I want to build. I have $20. How much plywood can you get for me? That sort of, you have to be like a creative construction person sometimes.
I love dragging the employees into my science project. I love sharing my problems with them. So I think we're on like a first name basis with everyone in like the 50-kilometer vicinity. But I just love like the applied science aspect of it. I think it's pretty cool. And I got some data back, and I mean the biofilms do provide a better like exposure exposure profile. So it's really nice that it worked. And I'm going to repeat it in the upcoming spring and summer. So yeah, it's just so cool that like, it's like this new field of science that's coming out. And yeah, I love it. I think it's so neat.
So can you find, if you take a biofilm sample, is there a way to get sort of a timeline of exposure?
Not if you're taking biofilm from natural substrate, because it's just, we don't know how long it's been there. But I have like 2 sampling periods. Yeah, because I'll put them in and I can stamp the date I put them in, and I know it takes 6 to 8 weeks to colonize, and I go back and then collect it. So I can't really say when these pulses and these dips and concentrations are happening, but I at least know what's been accumulated over that 6 to 8 week period. And I repeated a few times in each growing season. But yeah, it's interesting because actually it's a bit depressing. DDT, as I was saying before, it was banned in like 1985, I believe. And that was just like a really potent insecticide, extremely potent. But in some of my reference sites, the sites that I thought would be very clean because I don't see any hits when I was looking at historical water quality measurements, I'm like finding DDT in the biofilm samples. It's crazy. Yeah, it's all the metabolites that just take so long to break down, but we're still finding them. and we didn't know they were there because
Whoa, so you're saying that that's DDT that's just been circulating through food webs? It's not, there's no way to know if it's like new, like some rogue farmers dumping DDT.
It could be, but it's like very controlled, but you
Wow.
also never know. But I'm talking about this one particular site, like way up near Tobermory, if you know, like on the Bruce Peninsula. And there's no agriculture in the region and like on the surrounding land that is bordering this particular river. So I wouldn't expect it to be a rogue farmer, because they would have to be really dumping it for it to appear, because it's completely surrounded by forest. Like there's no houses. And I was very upset to see that, but it's important. At least we know it's there. And once you know it's there, then you can work towards fixing that problem. But until you know it's there, you can't.
Yeah, totally. Like a lot of our problems are just measurement problems. If you don't have data, you can't make a good decision. And it just, there's so much we just don't know. And even, this work is key to like just finding out more of like how our food chain and our health and the environment, they're all connected. And it's great that this is happening.
But very hard to get money for monitoring. It's very hard because it's expensive too, because for it to be of any value, you need to invest in frequent measurements.
You need a lot of measurements.
And that's a lot of money, and that's hard to get funding for.
It's not like you just throw a thermometer in the air and get, and here's the weather.
That's not how you use thermometers. We have a lot of broken thermometers on the ground.
I throw them in the air and I know what the temperature is.
So that, it's literally a money issue. Yeah. Because like if you were to take water samples every 30 minutes with like something called a high frequency water sampler, that would be great. You would get this beautiful pesticide curve. Right. But I can tell you each water sample is a few $100s. So if you're sending all these samples in, you need so much money. But instead of sending multiple samples for this, let's say 8-week period, we could just have one biofilm sample. So then cost saving potentially. So I'm hoping that maybe they could like incorporate it in tandem, maybe with water monitoring, but it's pitched as a low cost alternative.
Right.
That always gets people's attention.
Yes.
Cheap?
Cheap who?
Listen to this Moira gal. She's got some ideas. So you mentioned being passionate about aquatic ecosystems, Moira, and the challenges they face. Besides pesticides, what are some other challenges that concern you for our aquatic ecosystems?
Ooh, I think every time I walk into the lab and I talk to my lab mates, the list grows longer and longer. Right. But yeah, my lab mates are doing some really interesting projects. We all do aquatic talks for the most part, but microplastics is a big issue. Right. What we're seeing in wastewater that comes out of treatment plants, big issue, because we're seeing heavy metals, and we have tests going with antidepressants and how they affect like other mollusks and all this kind of stuff. Particularly pesticides concern me because agriculture, especially in our area, is such a big concern, but it's just this mix of everything that is man-made is just wrecking such a havoc on things that are going on in the rivers.
It's unbelievable.
So hopefully we can work better to protect our rivers in the province, but it's such a tricky thing because you can't just ban pesticides or ban the use of microplastics and this, that, and the other, because then people suffer. Like it's so easy to preach like environmental sustainability when you're not the one that's being impacted, but can't tell farmers not to use pesticides that like they feed our entire country. Yeah. So it's trying to find a way to make it better, I think. But there's one project going on in our lab where they're looking at using trees and like call them riparian buffers, but instead of just having farm field and then river, you would have like this little buffer area, and that kind of helps protect what's going into our rivers. And she's finding some really cool stuff that buffered, of course, as you can predict, buffered areas do a better job in protecting our rivers. So maybe we can start to incorporate that kind of stuff rather than red tape and ban this, ban that, because it's just not that simple, I don't think.
It's so fascinating. As someone who lives in a city, I'm pretty dissociated from like all the water and the food, and like I turn on a tap, water comes out, it goes down a little drain, and then it disappears into the environment. But there's so much more that goes into this. All of the food that we eat and all of the chemicals are in there, and those go into the municipal water. And being able to have an awareness of what is going in and coming out of all of our water, it seems key. We're all water based. We need water. We need clean water. We need clean air. It seems self-evident that we would want to know how it is, but it just seems infinitely complicated. We just kind of do stuff without thinking about the consequences.
It's more like I wish it was more preventative, but we're
Sure.
kind of learning about it after the fact,
Yes.
which is a particular concern. But the more you know, I think the better informed you can make decisions and policies and this, that, and the other. So step one is get the data.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, encouraging anyone, I mean, we see that with COVID, right? Getting anyone to be proactive is difficult, taking care of problems that haven't happened yet, even if you have all sorts of evidence that it's going to happen and be way more expensive. I know with invasive species was my focus for my PhD. And you can show people, like, you can't eradicate. There is no dealing with after, and just sort of controlling it is this many billions of dollars. Preventing it would be these millions of dollars. So getting people still in that, even with all that information, it's hard to get people to invest in.
But it's not a problem now, so why do I got to spend
But
a
it will
million?
be a problem.
I don't know. Maybe not. What if it isn't?
I've been fighting with Vinny over this for a long time.
I won't give you my millions.
So Moira, why don't you tell us a bit about your sort of journey towards becoming a master's student in science? Were you always, as little Moira, were you dreaming of this, or what were your scientific interests as a kid?
It's so funny because I never thought like I would end up in grad school. Like that was never really part of the plan. And even like in high school, like I just never considered myself good at science. I was always good at biology, but like physics and chemistry were not my strong suit, you could say. So then I kind of just like ruled out science in general, but I loved biology so much.
Right.
And then I studied environmental science in undergrad because of like the love for biology. And like I did not do well in the courses I was not interested in, but anything biology, like outdoors, anything, like because I loved it so much, like I obviously you just put more time into it.
Right.
And then and then I was like, oh hey, this is pretty fun actually. Like I really like learning about this stuff. And then still like in my later years in my undergrad, like it was never like an option to go to grad school for me, but I had this one particular professor that I stalked all of his papers and I just thought he was like the coolest guy ever. And I took every single class he offered and did as many projects in his lab as I could because he was just so cool. And then I think doing like those mini projects you can do as an undergrad kind of like blew my mind. And I was like, oh, it's so cool. You can design experiments and answer questions. Like you're kind of like itching that itch of like, what if? And I just like loved that whole process. And then he kind of just acted more as like a mentor to me. And I ended up in toxicology, which is I have no background in, but I'm loving it.
But I think it just goes to show, like when you're passionate about something, you know, aptitude is a factor, but it's not the only factor. And so many people, if they don't feel like they have the aptitude for it, they're like, well, I'm just going to rule this out. Where in reality, it's passion that really is going to carry the day. If you care about something, you want to pursue it, you'll do it.
And like I think sometimes if you don't have like the right personality to be like learning in a classroom setting, like that's not how I learn best.
Right.
And but that's how like you succeed in university is, can you memorize this, that, and the other? But like those like hands-on classes and fieldwork classes, that's what I enjoyed the most. But that's just like, I was like, that's grad school. So it seems like a good fit because it's so hands-on and like I love that part about it so much. And then you're studying something that you think is really cool. So I don't mind doing it all day. It's great.
But there's such a disconnect between being good at book learning and sitting in a class and regurgitating answers versus being a good scientists in general, but
Yes.
especially like a field ecologist, that needs a really particular set of skills that often doesn't, I would say, coincide with having the greatest marks, right? You have to be really hardy and have a stick-to-itiveness about, bad environmental conditions and on top of the curiosity and creativity that comes with being a good scientist in general,
You
Yeah,
have to love to suffer a bit if you're a field scientist, I think.
Absolutely. I always say the number one criteria I think for a good field ecologist is being able to withstand discomfort.
Yes.
'Cause that is the name of the job. And you have to persist with failure and, repetition in uncomfortable conditions in one way or another.
I mean, there's a huge difference between like pure and applied.
Yeah.
Like the practical, the theoretical, and the experimental. They're like really different fields. And one of them is hands-on. One of them you do have to be a little more do it yourself. You have to really be like adaptable and flexible and make do with the conditions that you're given. And it's a whole different set of skills than just like book stuff, theoretical stuff, and working in ideas and pens and paper.
But so much of our measures of success before you start publishing is grades, and almost exclusively
Yes.
grades. And it's so easy, I think, as a young scientific-minded student to be like, I can't do this just because I don't have straight A's and the other people who are doing science have straight A's.
Right.
And therefore, even though I love this, I can't do this. And that's so sad because, that's not the case.
And it's not something we test for, right? We don't test
No.
for like how adaptable, how hands-on you can be. Like, can you build something? In undergrad, generally, like in grad school, that's like the thing that you're tested on, like you're pushed to do, and you get results for actually going out into the field, sticking slides in the rivers, and collecting all that data, and dealing with sleeping in your own filth for 5 days in a row. That needs to be
Moira.
That needs to be an undergrad
Hey.
class.
I would love to pitch that. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's so true. Like, especially like those first few years where it's just like the prereqs that you have to get
Yeah.
through. Like, yeah, I remember feeling so discouraged, but I wasn't interested in chemistry or calculus or
Yeah.
math. Like, I was interested in a particular set of things, and it needed to be like more applied. So in the later years, that kind of, you can pick and choose what you study, but
Right.
I just think it's like this big scary thing going to grad school. But
Yeah.
I just hope people shouldn't get discouraged.
Yeah.
I know I was, but I'm glad like I had like that professor who was kind of more of like a mentor figure, and he was like, you can do it, you're fine.
Yeah, mentors are huge.
Yes.
I've learned that like the people who do persist and succeed are people who had encouragement from someone who knew. It's nice to have encouragement from parents and family, but they don't know. They usually have no idea what they're talking
Right.
about. But to have like a professor, to have someone who's been there,
and
to
done
be
it,
like,
yeah.
I see myself in you. You can do this too. It's
Yeah.
so huge.
Yeah, and they just open the door and leave it to you to walk through. That's
So
the
what's
key.
next for Moira?
Yeah.
After you finish your master's, I know this is distant future, but where would you love to see your life
How
in
much
the future?
rock snot do you see in the future?
Oh, I love the rock snot. I'm going to be so sad to graduate, but I still have a good year left, just chugging through halfway. So I still feel like I'm so far away from the real world, because I have so much work to do to get,
Yeah.
to get done in 1 year. But yeah, it's so funny to think of after graduation, and especially like in a COVID world.
Yeah.
Where I love like the hands-on and being in person, but as more COVID happens, like you never know if that's still going to be a thing.
Yeah.
But I think I would like to stay like out in the field, and like I just love aquatics so much. So being a field biologist is kind of the dream.
Yeah.
So any job where I can be out in the river, that would be the best situation possible. So yeah, I'm just trying to pick up as many aquatic related knowledge that I can. But it's so great, like being in a big lab with a bunch of really interesting scientists. You can kind of learn about their organisms and how to work with them, and like volunteering with other projects is so great for kind of testing out different fields before you commit and get a job there. So it's been picking and choosing, but I love the aquatics. So hopefully the biology route works. That's what we're going for.
Well, we think you have everything it takes to succeed,
Yeah.
Moira, and the rock snot needs you.
Yeah. And we
Thank
need the
you.
rock snot.
Absolutely. I'm going to probably incorporate that into my thesis title now.
Yeah.
Rock snot,
We need you.
we need you. I mean, I would go to that talk.
Yeah, rock snot,
Like,
we need you.
what is up with
Yeah,
this
I'm
Looney
into it.
Tune with that?
Thank
that
you.
title?
That was a great idea.
Well, Moira, this has been an absolute delight. Thank you
Thank you
for
so
sharing
much.
your work and your passion for aquatic ecosystems with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great.
Well, and best of luck with the rock snot, Moira.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was absolutely
That
delightful.
was amazing. I learned so much.
Biofilms.
Biofilms.
I forgot to mention, we have biofilms on our teeth.
Oh,
You
really?
know, if you lick your teeth right now, if it hasn't been a while since you brushed, we're not gross people. It's just
No.
midday.
Yeah.
We do brush.
We have biofilm.
Yeah, biofilm on your teeth.
Wow.
Anywhere where there's water and bacteria,
That's my mouth.
you can have a biofilm. It won't be periphyton.
Okay.
Yet.
No diatoms.
No diatoms. There really should not be diatoms growing on
On
your
your
teeth.
teeth? No.
We'll have to call Moira if that's
All
the
right.
case.
Well, I'll stop chewing rocks from the river.
Okay, finally. I was hoping you'd say that.
Well, that was amazing.
That was awesome.
I love it.
I love talking to people who are passionate about what they do.
Yeah.
Especially when it's things that aren't, necessarily cutest. No
Rock
offense,
snot
it's
is not cute,
Well,
but it's kind of cute.
yeah, everything is.
Well, you
Everything
love
has its-
animals.
I love everything.
You love nature.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Everything has its place.
It's pretty great.
We learned a lot today, Vinny.
I certainly
We
did.
learned about space helicopters.
Space helicopters.
And millipedes.
Millipedes.
With actual legit OG millipedes with 1,000 plus legs.
1,000 plus legs.
And rock snot.
And rock snot.
And
That's
it's
a good day. I put that in the good day book.
Yeah, absolutely. Vinny, why don't you send everyone else out on our socials? Right.
If you're interested in following us on social media, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at LRGPod. That's LRGPod. And if you're interested in being a guest with us, you can always send us an email at learnrealgood@gmail.com. Learnrealgood@gmail.com. Your email address for being a grad student on this podcast.
Thank you to Moira for being an awesome
Thanks,
guest.
Moira.
Thank you, Vinny, for being an awesome co-host.
Thank you, Katie, for being the awesomest co-host.
Whoa, competition.
Tied.
And thank you for listening and being the awesomest
Ist.
fans of our Top 50 podcast.
Top 50 podcast.
See you next time, folks.
Bye-bye.